Recommence the hearing, everyone, and welcome a rather large crew from the tourism sector. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'll let George do the introductions. So there's three presentations have been merged here, and there will be plenty of time for questions because I can assure you there are plenty of questions. So good morning and welcome.
Mr. Chairman, can I just indicate where the councillors can find this information? Annie Dundas, that's part 1, page 36. And Michele Cole, part 3, page I-14. Sorry? Okay. And Dave? The first one is submission 14, and you'll find it on part 1, page 36. Okay. The next one is submission 69, which you will find on part 3, I-14. And the last one, submission 131, is part 5, page 54.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora, nei rau te mihi. Kia hu mai nei tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity of talking to the tourism submission. The plan that we've put forward, I know, has been well canvassed, and we've spoken to you a number of times about our goal for tourism in Hawke's Bay, and that this plan has been formulated through an agreement with all other councils, which we think is in a sense, a watershed moment, and I think you'll find that those councils will present on this issue as well and highlight their support for what we're planning to do. Now, as part of the team that's here today, first of all, I'd like to introduce Chris Roberts. Chris is the Chief Executive of the Tourism Industry Association of New Zealand, and that's, for your benefits, the equivalent of the tourism's federated farmers. They represent all of the major players in the industry. Their board consists of people from the airlines, the hotel accommodation. And they have recently developed a tourism framework for 2025, which was the plan that we based our strategy on. So Chris will talk to you about the national perspective and where Hawke's Bay sits with us. He's flown up specially to be at this presentation today. Michele Cole. Michele is the General Manager of the Crown Hotel. The Crown Hotel was the Supreme Accommodation winner last year. And Michele will talk about what it's like to be a Hawke's Bay tourism operator and competing on the national scene. And to my right's Dave Simmons. Dave is our Auckland-based board member. He's been with us for 4 years. His background is a senior executive with Air New Zealand and some overseas travel companies. And Dave will just talk briefly about the Hawke's Bay perspective from outside of the region. So just by way of introduction, I just thought I'd highlight, what are we proposing here? Essentially, we've asked for a significant increase in our budget, but we've asked for that for one reason. Our aim is to actually double the economic impact of tourism in the Hawke's Bay region over the next 10 years. That essentially will add in the year 2025 $500 million to the local economy. I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that there would not be another industry that you're looking at the moment that could go anywhere near that. But more importantly than that, this is simply what happens at year 10. Through this investment year on year, we obviously get improvements as we go. The net gain cumulative over that time will be $2.7 billion to the Hawke's Bay economy, if we get this right. Why do we need the money? Well, we need the money so that we can, for the first time, in my recollection and all the time I've been in tourism, both nationally and here, for the first time, we can competitively mark Hawke's Bay outside of our region. We do a little bit at the moment, but frankly, we get swept away in the clutter of the other regions. Hawke's Bay, like all regions, can be very easily forgotten if it doesn't stand up and make itself heard. So we want to be heard. We believe we have to be heard if we're actually going to make any impact. When do we need to do it? Well, the answer is now. And the reason for that is tourism is currently on an extremely strong growth path nationally. And we stand to either lose or gain as that grows. If we don't catch the upswing, we will simply have to spend a lot more money to claw back market share from the rest of the country as other regions fill the void. By simply arguing over the size of the pie here, what will happen is the other regions will simply eat it before we get there. We must stay with the flow and the growth that's about to happen in the tourism industry. It's strong, and we can participate in that. And what we're arguing for is simply to keep pace with the growth. We're not anticipating that we'll have enough money to actually outpace other regions, but if we don't at least stay within the growth curve, we stand to lose a lot of money. That goal of $1 billion simply puts us on a standard growth path. So our view is, from a tourism point of view, we simply can't afford to let that happen. For tourism, for Hawke's Bay, and for the people, the employment opportunities, the business opportunities that will stem off it. So just to look at that from a national perspective, I'll now ask Chris to talk through just how Hawke's Bay is viewed nationally and their view on the national tourism economy. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, George. Thank you to Annie for inviting me to come along. So Tourism 2025, it has a goal of tourism being worth $41 billion to the New Zealand economy by 2025. And this is all about alignment, coordination and targeted investment if we're going to get to there. The great power of tourism is how it benefits our entire community, all of our people across the country, urban areas, rural areas. It's the ripple effect of that spend. So currently, tourism spends around $66 billion per day in our economy, and it's not just going on the obvious places like the air flights to get somewhere or the rental car, the camper van, but goes into the entertainment, the accommodation, the restaurants, the petrol stations that are used, and then on further to supermarkets, shopping, theatre, and farming. I think Hawke's Bay is probably a good example of that. The tourists coming to Hawke's Bay are spending money at the farm gate on the asparagus or the strawberries, or they're buying those same products at the restaurant or at the supermarket. So the tourism spend does spread right through your local economy. Tourism often gets labelled as being subsidised by government. This slide is because of the organisation George used to head, Tourism New Zealand. So the government funds that to market New Zealand internationally, and that does get accused of tourism is subsidised. This is actually showing what central government spends. The smaller figure is how much goes on vote tourism. The bigger block is how much goes on vote primary industries. So the agriculture sector, the primary industry sector in New Zealand gets approximately 5 times the support that the tourism sector does in direct government spending. And within that, there's a couple of, as an example, there's a couple of funds that sit within that. Agriculture's had a fund for a few years now, the Primary Growth Partnership Fund. That's 1-for-1 matched funding, essentially government subsidising good ideas in the farming sector. That's so far handed out $150 million and has already got commitments to hand out $350 million. A similar fund has been set up in the tourism sector. That's so far handed out a bit less than $10 million. So similar funds, the agriculture one's about 35 times bigger than the tourism one. Right now, New Zealand is undeniably a hot destination sitting in the world. A lot of things are in tourism's favour right now. International arrivals into the country in the last 12 months, and these are the latest figures, are up 7%. The average spend per visitor, which is the key thing, it's not a numbers game, it's about the value of these visitors. The average spend is up by 14%, and sort of a combination of that means the total spend by international visitors is up an astonishing 21%. This is possibly the greatest growth rate we've ever seen. There might be something back in the 1900s to match it, but the last 12 months we are seeing a real tourism boom. So that makes us feel a lot more comfortable about our Tourism 2025 goal, which is 6% compound growth year on year out to 2025. And the government just a couple of weeks ago released its official forecasts, and it's out for the next 6 years, and it's predicting 5.8% growth. That's based on macroeconomic settings, not on intervention, not on the sort of intervention that we're talking about today to exceed that. So right now we are in very much an upswing in the tourism sector, and this year tourism will replace dairy as New Zealand's #1 export sector. That's from the growth tourism is seeing and the significant decline in the dairy sector. Those official figures won't come through for a while, but we know from all the indicators that right now, this year, tourism is easing past dairy to become New Zealand's #1 export earning sector. And in some regions, it's those tourism dollars circulating through the local economy that is going to keep those regions' heads above water as dairy declines. Now, of course, visitor growth means employment growth, opportunities for our young people, and we've commissioned recently and just released some work, commissioned some work from NZIER on what sort of workforce is going to be needed in 10 years' time. So this is the national picture. Currently, officially measured by Stats New Zealand, there are 94,000 full-time equivalent workers directly employed in tourism in New Zealand and working in that $24 billion industry. We're saying that the industry should grow to $41 billion over the next 10 years, and the workforce obviously grows to match that to 130,000 full-time equivalent workers, more actual workers, but in terms of full-time equivalents, up to 130,000. So that's another 36,000 additional workers as the tourism industry grows, and that's direct jobs. There'll be many more indirect jobs created. Hawke's Bay's growth is forecast to be well below average without intervention, without changing the current settings. So that number there for Hawke's Bay, that's about a 22% growth, calculated on current settings, current trends of how many additional jobs you'll get in Hawke's Bay. That's roughly 1,000 jobs. There's about 5,000 people directly employed in tourism in Hawke's Bay at the moment. The forecast is for 1,000 additional jobs to be added to that over the next decade. You should be aiming for at least twice that number. You should be aiming for 2,000 additional full-time jobs over the next decade, not settling for just 1,000. And how has Hawke's Bay been travelling over the last 5 years or so? We have seen an increase. This measured by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, gone from 440 million to 554 million over the last 5 years, and that 554 million will definitely be increased since the 2014 figures because of that boom that we're in at the moment. And in fact, that international performance there, which has been very flat, and that's typical for New Zealand, but we are now seeing that international tick up. So the next available number, the 2015 number, will show, and no doubt will show a tick up in international. What Hawke's Bay has been able to do is perform pretty well in the domestic space, and I suspect that reflects the very good work of Hawke's Bay Tourism, promotion of events and so forth, what it has been able to do within its pretty limited budget. But just to conclude my comments, I think the $1 billion spend in Hawke's Bay by 2025 is absolutely achievable, but only with a step change now in resources to be able to market and promote this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just hand over to Michele, who just talked a good bit about the crowd.
Thank you, George. A question you may ask of the industry is how does the industry actually support tourism in Hawke's Bay? The Crown Hotel significantly supports and contributes to tourism Hawke's Bay and tourism in Hawke's Bay generally. The Crown Hotel ourselves, just with direct marketing spend alone, we have $85,000 now, an $85,000 budget that we have per year. That has grown since I have been in the role. We saw an area where we needed to increase our occupancy in the hotel. We saw some troughs throughout the year, and we needed to make sure that we had the marketing spend to be able to drive that and have a strategy to drive tourism into Hawke's Bay with that $85,000 spend that we now currently have. And it's not specifically about, we significantly promote that outside of Hawke's Bay region. We have a lot of tactical campaigns in the North Island regional areas through Kiora magazine, Cuisine magazine throughout the year as well, consistent advertising. And it's not just about advertising to get people to the Crown Hotel, it's significantly the first and foremost aspect is getting people to Hawke's Bay. It's getting people to the region. The second aspect is hopefully they'll stay at the Crown Hotel. So that's the most important thing, is what are we doing to get people to Hawke's Bay? As I said, with that significant increase in marketing spend, we saw a positive impact on our ROI and return on investment with the marketing and tactical campaigns that we've been going through over the last few years. That, as I said, is just direct marketing spend. We also contribute significantly to Tourism Hawke's Bay through complimentary room nights, through trends, trade shows, for example. So we get pre and post for mill groups that come through, so agents that come over internationally from overseas, domestic agents that come within New Zealand. So we provide complimentary room nights to support trade shows for mill groups, media, etc. throughout the year. Just say, for example, the trends pre and post for mill groups that we had coming through, so agents that we supplied accommodation to, came to 4,500 just for one for mill group that came through. That is basically what we gave up. We could have sold those room nights, retail room nights, so that's revenue that we actually basically fulfilled or forgoed to try and get those agents to make the awareness of Hawke's Bay itself. That was just with one for mill group. The hotel is performing extremely well. Yes, we are. We're seeing a great increase year on year in occupancy. With that, we're able to provide work all year round to our 22 employees. We make sure that we've got the work generated for them to continue their employment throughout the year. So we don't lay staff off during our winter months. We keep them going throughout the year. Our staff retention is high, and we have long-term employees, which is fantastic within this region. Performing hotel also has a flow-on effect to our suppliers. My belief, and throughout the hotel, is we keep it very local. So a lot of our suppliers are truly local, ranging from like Hohepa cheese to our mini bars, Silky Oat chocolates, Filter Room, Telegraph Hill, etc. And of course our central linen service that does all our dry cleaning and cleaning for our linen, etc. So we do perform very well with them, and also with the charities and sponsorships that we provide throughout the year. Say, for example, Hawke's Bay Magpies, we significantly contribute. However, we do have room to perform even better in the hotel and take on additional staff, so we have the potential to increase our occupancy. We've got potential to grow. Additional inventory is coming into Hawke's Bay, as we know. We've just had East Pier open up. We've got David Mackesy building and developing Hawke's Bay or Havelock North Hotel, which will be 40 rooms, so that will require additional employment. However, they see tourism in New Zealand as being the future, but without external exposure, we run the risk of these hotels underperforming and a glut of inventory outside our peak months. So the Crown Hotel has consistently supported Hawke's Bay tourism over the years, and now all we're asking is for a further increase in their funding, as we can't do it alone. Thank you for your time.
Lovely. I never get accused of having a quiet voice. So, excuse me, I've been involved in the global tourism industry for the last 20 years, both here and in Europe. And when Sam called me 4 years ago and asked if I'd consider joining the tourism board, I personally was very excited. And that for me, looking from outside of the region with no connections to the region at all, Hawke's Bay was probably one of the few provinces or regions, in my view, within New Zealand that had not yet fulfilled its tourism potential. And interestingly, when I engaged with the leadership at Air New Zealand at the time, where I was employed at the time, they too were very supportive of me joining the tourism board here, on the basis they also felt very strongly that actually Hawke's Bay was an unfulfilled tourism destination, which is interesting. That was quite a unique model at the time, and in fact I still believe that I've been the only person at Air New Zealand who's actually sat on a regional tourism board. So that was the level of commitment there. I think over the last 4 years, the organisation's achieved some fairly solid results. Indeed, even evidenced today, I was flying down, and in the Kiora magazine, there was a full-page coverage around Winter Fork, and that contrasted with sort of half-page sort of excerpts on other regions. The region's been hitting reasonably strong results, albeit largely with its hands tied behind its back, I would suggest, over the last 4 years. And whilst not being unappreciative of the funding that's been received, in a competitive landscape, it has been somewhat limited to drive those results. And I think the risk that we have looking forward is that we really risk being left behind. As other regions continue to, I guess, foster that commitment around tourism as a primary industry for them. And to put it in some sort of context, as someone, I won't call myself an Aucklander, but someone who lives in Auckland, it's a competitive landscape that Hawke's Bay operates in. Within a 2-hour drive from Auckland, which is one of our primary sort of source markets here in the Hawke's Bay, I have any number of different options to go and explore. We have pretty good weather, and we have great beaches that I can go and explore. We have islands in the Hauraki Gulf. We have vineyards in Matakana. We have great cycling tracks around some of the forests out in Woodhall and Riverhead, etc. So we have many, many great things to do within a 2-hour drive with my family. On top of that, there are also a number of regions fiercely competing for that large domestic market. Just off the top of my head, in the last 3 or 4 months, the likes of Taupo have been very active in market. Queenstown, very active now in market. Rotorua even have had a fairly consistent presence on television during the last 3 to 6 months. Yet Hawke's Bay simply hasn't been able to compete in that space. So all the while, as a potential visitor to Hawke's Bay simply getting lost with the options I have on my doorstep, as well as other regions competing for my discretionary tourism dollar. If Hawke's Bay is going to fulfil the potential that it has, and there is no doubt it has significant potential as a premium tourism destination, we have to refocus and up the effort as a region to achieve those results and those opportunities that Chris was alluding to in terms of the economic and employment benefits that sit sort of within our grasp that we're not fully grasping at the moment. So, I would kind of urge the region to endorse the submission that's been put forward and seriously consider that the uplift in funding that we desperately need to achieve the sort of results that I think the region deserves and can achieve. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. That really brings us to the end of the presentation. Just in summary, what I would like to add is that I sat before this council about some question about whether or not you should even have one. We said we won't let you down. I don't think we have. We really want to go again because we passionately believe that this region can do a lot better, and we'd like to lead that for you. So that's our submission. We think we can provide more economic benefit to Hawke's Bay over the next 10 years than probably anyone else in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, and there will be plenty. Let's start with Councillor Dick.
Thanks for your presentation. 2 questions. Do you believe that we've got the product and infrastructure here for you to market?
Hello everyone. Yes, I do, but we can't always sit back and rest on what we have, and I think the cycle trails are a perfect example of a new product that's developed really in the last 3 or 4 years, thanks to great contributions of funding from many councils, and now cycling's kind of the new golf, and it is a serious sought after international tourism product. There is always room, and one of the products that desperately needs more attention and help is what we do with Lake Waikaremoana and the walk and the track. It's one of the most underutilised products. And we do have to keep evolving. Infrastructure-wise, Michele might not like me saying this, but yes, we could do with more accommodation, particularly in Napier around that hotel category, and in obviously Hastings Havelock, and we've got the benefit of a new property being built in Havelock ready next year.
Okay, thanks. My second question is to you, Annie. A submitter on behalf of Hastings District Council earlier on gave, I think, sort of endorsement, but with reservation in terms of supporting the extra funding. And what he said sort of concerned me a little bit. He said that tourism Hawke's Bay is not involved in the development of the update of the regional economic development strategy, and in response to a question from myself, seemed to indicate that the collaborative essence of the earlier plan had sort of slipped, and that you people were not involved with Business Hawke's Bay. As
We
you were
are. No,
before.
we are. And I've had 2 meetings with the Reds group in the last 2 weeks, I guess. So we've presented our bigger plan, which you've seen, and so they're fully across that. And I think we work hand in glove. You know, we have to be part of that economic strategy for the region, and we are.
Okay, so the assertion that was made is not correct.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott, then Councillor Belford.
Challenge over funding. Is there another model than just funding it purely from ratepayer funding? And I guess this is directed to those that have got knowledge right throughout New Zealand. Are there different funding models there? Are there other ways we can clip the ticket to make sure that you target the beneficiaries fairly?
It's one of the reasons we brought Chris. They deal with this issue all the time, because everybody asks, is there another way to fund tourism? So,
There are some varieties with 30 RTOs around the country. They all have some variety in how that's funded. Through rates is generally the way it's done, and then it's really down to the level and how the rates are structured. I mean, I note that currently here in Hawke's Bay it's about $12 per ratepayer going to tourism. The national average across the whole country is $24 per ratepayer, so you're at half the national average of funding for tourism support. So I think the funding increase that's been requested will just about get you to the average. It doesn't put you in the top half, gets you close to the average in terms of local government support for local tourism. But most of the funding models are ratepayer based with some level of direct operator support, as with the membership system that you have here in Hawke's Bay is one way. Sometimes there are variances on that model, but every case there is some degree of ratepayer direct payment towards the RTO.
Thank you. Councillor Belford.
Just to comment on that average, I believe that's an average based on the amount of money we're giving to Hawke's Bay Tourism, correct?
Yes.
It's not the regional spend on tourism. But my question has to do with the growth that you're anticipating here seems to be driven by international visiting, the national growth projection. And here historically, we've had a pretty stable 80-20, I think it is, domestic to international. So do you actually believe that spending more money on advertising is going to drive more international visitors to Hawke's Bay?
yes, we do. The growth path we've seen is for both domestic and international growth. You effectively have to have a strong domestic tourism economy to attract international visitors anyway. They get caught in that upswing. And we do need to promote. If we don't promote, we simply will not be on the radar for those people's itinerary. And we'll see the impact on that. There's a long tail in tourism marketing. In fact, we're only just starting to see the upswing in international thing because we did nothing for so long. We're starting to now see that the impact of bringing people out here to see this region for the first time is starting to have. If we don't stay with that, we will start to find that we will simply get further and further behind the rest of the country.
Follow-up, if I may. I'm just trying to connect the dots here. It seems to be that international travelers make their decisions well before arriving on shore here.
That's right.
And so, again, I guess I question what part of this plan would be really targeted at grabbing onto those international visitors.
Essentially, they have to have Hawke's Bay in their choice set at the time they're considering a New Zealand itinerary. And if they're not aware of us, and they don't know what to do here, they'll ignore us.
But I
That's
think,
the
Tom, you're
problem.
also saying, the majority of our spend is domestically driven, so it doesn't, it's, but we will continue the work we do in an international environment, which is around hosting international media, which we know works brilliantly. But we also want to extend that into, are there programs that we haven't had access to before that we could really profile the region? And, we've been approached by one very famous chef here to work with an international chef to run an international TV series around what we have. So the funding allows us to stretch a little further. It gives us a domestic reach, but it also allows us to step into that international space.
Councillor Graham, we've got a minute left.
Oh, thank you. I have two questions, and I would answer all at once just in case we run out of time. But firstly, I just want to say I thought your branding approach is seriously stunning, and really pleased to see that leveraging off that Avery Thorpe original design which we had, and so a way of bringing this all together. It's beyond tourism. It's about who we are. But I noticed the Wine Boys went out last week with something different. That sort of disappointed me when I read that in the paper. I want to know your attitude to that. And my second question is, so tourism's going to overtake the dairy industry. I think I got you right when you said you're 130,000 jobs in New Zealand. Do you know how many jobs in the dairy industry in New Zealand? So there's two questions there.
The first one on the wine, we did work with them on the branding, and mostly I think they felt that they wanted something a little different from a pure business to business point of view rather than a consumer brand. And I think, that was their choice at the end of the day. But and I think they're particularly using that in China, and they really wanted to talk to the rivers and the landscape of the region, and that's the way they went. I think we worked with them really closely, but yes, it would have been nice to have had them working alongside us. And wine country is still a fabulous concept, and Hawke's Bay still owns that, and I think there's no reason why it still can't be used.
Sorry, I don't know. I know dairy is lower than tourism, but I don't know the actual number in terms of direct employment. So that's 94,000 directly employed in tourism, which goes up to 170,000 odd counting indirect. But I know it's higher, but I don't actually know the dairy number.
And that's 30 minutes up. Thank you, everyone. So, thank you. Councillor Bevan's shooting a few daggers. I'll have a chat with him at lunchtime. So, thank you very much for your presentation and giving us an ability to ask a few questions, and we will be in touch. So, thank you.